I think from the youngest age, I had a fascination with things that were old. I had a coin collection from when I was around 5 or 6, and there was just something about the idea that I was holding a coin that went back to the 1800s, which in the United States is old history. And eventually I got into, when I lived in England for a while, I used to go to a coin store that had British coins that went back to the 1700s. And there was just something about holding things that were old that I don't know why, but it fascinated me. I used to love to talk to old people, my grandparents, and hear their stories. I never got tired of that, and I still don't. I love to talk to people about, who are old, about their past experiences. And I guess in a way, I sometimes say to my students that history is like a cheap way to travel. You just go back. The past is another country, they sometimes say. And it's just a way of getting out of your own immediate world and experiencing people who's, in some ways, there's continuities. In some ways, there's certain sort of sides to the human experience that's timeless. And we can go back to ancient history and connect with people's passions, their fears, their aspirations, their experiences. But in many ways, you're looking at something very, very removed from our own. And I found that fascinating. And I found myself reading biographies of presidents and explorers when I was in elementary school. I think by what then added to my trajectory that kind of was leading to becoming a historian is around middle school or so. I realized that I liked writing, and a large part of what we do in the field of history is research and writing. It's a very creative process, and so I found I enjoyed my history classes in part because it connected me to the past, but also because it gave me a chance to write in analytical ways. And then as a teenager, or as a child, I grew up in a very politically engaged environment. It was the 60s when I was in elementary school, the 70s when I was a teenager, and there were so many issues in the air on war, the meanings of race, the meanings of the rise of the women's movement, clashing the culture, the mainstream culture and the counterculture of the 60s and early 70s, and clashing visions of what our society should look like. And it was a fertile time for the study of the history of these kinds of issues. So by the time I was in college, I found I just kept wandering into history courses because I enjoyed it, but also it was an exciting time to be studying these emerging fields of Black history, history of working people, labor history. These were issues that mattered to me in my own world, and I found that I could engage issues of race, of issues of opportunity, inequality. What are the what should be the governing ideals of our nation and our culture? And the more I got into history, the more I realized you could kind of sharpen your feeling for and what you had to think about these kinds of issues by looking at the past. I would say there's two, in some ways, very different levels of dimensions of studying history that make it, to my mind, so compelling and so important. In part, there's the substance of there's understanding the substance of our past, I just think there's something wistful or perhaps even tragic about the idea that people live, even an individual can live his or her life. Any life, particularly a long life, passes through so many levels of our culture, of the defining issues of our time. I mean, just to kind of personalize that, I think some of the earliest oral history that I ever did, asking people about their past experiences, was the oral history. I never heard of the term at the time, but the oral history I conducted with my grandparents. They were born, all of them, in the Ukrainian Jews, at the outset of the 1900s of the 20th century. All of them lived through the Russian Revolution, 1917. And had great emotions and passions connected with that event. All of them, for various reasons, then joined in the immigration to the United States, the kind of chain migration where one family member would go and then another would come and join them. One of my grandparents went to New York City, the other to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where I was born. And then they had their lives as immigrants in the 20s, the 30s, and beyond, looking for work, starting small, grocery shop business, working as a postal worker, becoming enmeshed in the sort of the Jewish working class culture of the immigrant Jewish world of the mid-century. They were involved in many of the social movements, the labor movement, radical movements of various sorts. Eventually, the anti-war movement of the 1960s. And my point is that both as just in their personal lives and struggles and their engagement with the issues of the time, their pasts connected with much of the past of the nation, and the idea that you could live lives like this, and everybody lives lives with drama of some sort, and it just vanishes once they're gone. It seems to me sad for them and for us, because their past experience and their struggles and so forth are the foundation for our own world. We live in different times, but not entirely unconnected from the kinds of times that people in the past have lived. I think it's very important that we remain connected with the struggles, with the aspirations, with the controversies, with the visions that have made people tick in the past, in part to honor that past experience, and in part to learn to find guidance in the lessons that they learned and experienced as we make our way through our own uncertain times. So that's part of it. I also think there's something about the process of studying history that can really enrich and sharpen our lives. We tend to think of history, as you mentioned before, many people find history boring, and understandably so, insofar as history is presented as just an avalanche of facts and a succession of events. What one famous historian named E.J. Hobsbawm described as that approach to history, teaching history, as one damn thing after another. Of course that's going to become boring if it's simply if it's presented without any analysis, if it's simply just presented as a history of events and developments that are said to be important, and you have to take on faith they're important. But the best of historical study that we do, I think, is engage in a process of interpretation, right? The Civil War happened. We know it happened. We know it began in 1861 and ended in 1865. That's beyond dispute. Fine. Why did it happen? Was it unavoidable? What were its repercussions and its legacy for our time? You can't reduce the answer to a clearly defined truth. That's a matter of interpretation. And so I think it's one avenue towards, I think, cultivating an inquiring and critical and analytical mind. For generations, historians have debated the question of why the Civil War happened and how inevitable or not was it. And in part, it's a matter of using reason and logic. In part, it's a matter of learning how to explore evidence and to critically assess evidence. So even if you're not going to become a historian, there's a great value to the discipline of studying history, because it can, whether you're going to become a lawyer, whether you're going to become a journalist, whether you're going to become a business figure, whatever it might be, the capacity to critically assess and evaluate evidence and arrive at analytical conclusions is a very important skill in life, and history can help, I think, foster that. I think I have a concern shared by many of my colleagues in the field that history, and more broadly the humanities, of which history is a part, is the legitimacy or importance of the humanities is under some assault, and that there is a broad sense that it's not a practical discipline, that it's an indulgence, that it's the STEM fields that get you to a job. And I understand that kind of thinking, but I think it's misplaced. There are studies, and I don't have them at hand right now, but there's studies that show, you look at some of the most successful people in a variety of professions that are not, explicitly history professions, whether it's public, government, in government, in business, in nonprofit work, whatever it might be, where they have their undergraduate training or majors were history, or at least minors. Again, I think it comes back to the way in which it's not so much that they know more about World War I or about the New Deal or whatever per se, but they have gotten a good, sort of liberal arts training in critical analysis of evidence, of theories, of sort of theoretical models that can help you assess that evidence and interpret and analyze. But I think too often that's forgotten, and there's a tendency, I think, in a number of quarters to measure the value of a certain field in terms of dollars and cents. What are the prospects you're going to get come out of that major with a job coming out of college that pays at least this much or that much. And I think that's kind of a limited way of thinking about what education is about. I am encouraged. I've recently heard that at Yale University, the number one major is once again history. So I hope that's not simply confined to the elite institutions. I hope that reflects a sense that historical study has a value, as with other branches of the humanities, has a value in cultivating an active analytical mind and cultivating engagement as citizens with the issues of our, cultivating active citizen and engaged citizenship. I hope that's what what's reflected in the reemerging popularity of historical study, at least at some universities. I mean, I'm a believer in broad, kind of traditional liberal arts, what you traditionally call liberal arts education, which should be diverse in its disciplinary approaches. I have no hostility to STEM to those fields. They're very significant. I guess it comes back to the question of what history offers as a mode of analysis, I think. I jokingly tell my students that I think everybody should be a history major, and inexplicably, though, sometimes some people decide to major in other fields, and what can we do? But that's kind of being facetious. I think to the extent that we can sell historical study as something that goes beyond simply learning this kind of, absorbing this fund of historical facts and developments that happened in early modern Europe, in the United States, in, ancient China, or wherever you might focus it. To the extent that we can present history as including, but not confining itself to simply acquiring the story, as if there's the story that that one learns and then it, and that's that. That's where history, I think, emerges as a partner, as a kind of as a partner to other disciplines, including those that fall into the STEM area. To the extent that we could say that we could convey that studying history is inseparable from the process of identifying problems, outcomes to explain, problems to explore, evidence to assess, those theoretical models that provide mechanisms for assessing and interpreting evidence, and the capacity to express, chiefly through writing, our sort of statement of these problems and explanations that make up historical study. Then I think history becomes a variant of all the great liberal arts disciplines. In a certain way, when pursuing historical scholarship, you're doing what scientists do in their fields. You're doing a variant of that. In other words, you identify an outcome that is both intriguing, significant, and doesn't lend itself to any obvious explanations. Why did the Civil War happen? That is an intriguing outcome. It happened. It's not self-evident why it happened. So you have to explore possible explanations. You have to come up with hypotheses. You have to figure out what evidence and tools you can use to test those hypotheses, and to arrive at some arguments as to what explains the outbreak of the Civil War. Well, that's in a sense comparable to scientists that try and explain outcomes that are intriguing, significant, and not, self-evident, but require the use of evidence and analytical thinking. I think the way to sell the significance of historical study, along with the other humanities like literature, philosophy, and so forth, is to present it as a variant of all the great disciplines and how they and the challenges they involve for the framing and addressing of significant intellectual problems.